It matters. It matters. And it never matters more than it's going to matter next Tuesday. Because this is an election for our lifetime. This is an election where we're going to decide what the future of the country is. I've been so honored to represent you in Washington for the past 13 months. I never thought when I was your chairman I would get to be your senator. It's really beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm privileged every day to be there. It's not lost on me what this means, that I get to represent 18.5 million Floridians in the world's greatest deliberative body. And for all the faults that government has, and trust me, we'll talk about those in a minute, there are a lot, it's still a tremendous honor. I was just recalling the other day when I first went down on the floor of the United States Senate. It was just between the period in August and September when I was sworn in. We had this really quick transition period when Senator Martinez stepped down. And I went to Washington to figure out who was going to stay on the staff, who we were going to bring in. And I met with the Republican secretary. Now, it's probably not a person you've ever heard of. His name is David Chiappa. He's a very important guy. There is a Democratic Secretary of the Senate and a Republican Secretary of the Senate. And if you see, when you're watching C-SPAN, you see the Senate. If you watch C-SPAN, I know you probably have better things to do. There's a desk in the front of the Senate dais where the President of the Senate sits. And you'll see some folks there. Well, they actually are running what's going on the floor of the Senate. And I met with David Chiappa, and he said, we had a meeting about committee assignments and things like that. And he said, hey, why don't we go down on the floor? Which I wasn't expecting. And he walked me on the floor of the United States Senate. And I realized, there's only 100 seats here. There's only 100 desks. And he walked me over to the desk that I would sit at and stand behind to represent you. Some of these desks are more than 100 years old. And behind some of these desks stood men like Daniel Webster and John Calhoun and the great leaders of our country in the past. And he said, this is where you will stand for Florida. And he showed me how to use the microphone and put it in my lapel, and he showed me how to seek recognition from the President of the Senate in order to advocate on your behalf. And I know for those of you who have served in public life, what I'm about to tell you is going to be reminiscent of an experience you had. As he was telling me this, I'm standing in this august body and looking up at the bust, the statuary that encircles the Senate chamber of the former presidents of the Senate, the former vice presidents of the United States, Jefferson, Adams, Burr, others. I could feel the weight. All of a sudden, I felt the responsibility that I was going to represent 18.5 million Floridians. And it was very clear to me at that moment that Florida only gets 2 senators. Remember that our founders created the United States Senate to be the place for the small states. The House is the place where you get more representation based upon population. The House is for the big states. The Senate is for Rhode Island. The Senate is for Hawaii and Montana. It's not for Florida. So what does that mean? It means your senator from Florida has to work extra hard because proportionally we're outnumbered. Some of these states, we could stick their populations in a corner of Broward County. Remember, Broward County is bigger than a dozen states in population. I think we're bigger than Nebraska. But Nebraska gets 2 senators. So I went back to the office and I met with the folks who I'm working with and have the privilege to work with every day. And I said to them, I want to get 6 years out of 16 months. I want to work as hard as I can for the people. And we've tried to do that. To climb the learning curve the best we could to represent you and to advocate our values. And that's why this election is so important. Here's the decision, and I want to put it as clearly and crisply as I can. This election is about what America do you want to live in? Do you want to live in the America that we all grew up in? The one where no matter who you are, where you came from, what's your race, your religion, your color, your creed, that you could achieve anything that you wanted?
Yeah!
Yes, sir. Ken? That's the America we want to live in. Where the only limit upon you are your hopes and your dreams and your ambition and your work ethic. Or do you want to live in America of diminished expectations? Do you want to live in America where all things aren't possible? Where we're not the greatest country in the world? Where we're not the leader that everyone looks up to? Where our children will not be able to achieve the things that we've been able to achieve? I don't want to live in that America. We are on the precipice. Our nation has out-of-control spending. People often come to me and say, what's the most surprising thing, George, about being in the United States Senate, about being a member of Congress? And the most surprising thing to me is how this government misspends the money. We are $1.3 billion in the hole in 2010. 1.3, I said billion, didn't I? Trillion. I'm not used to these big numbers. 1.3 trillion. It took, my friends, 200 years for this country to go $1 trillion in debt. And we just did $1.3 trillion in 1 year. Since January 1, 2007 to today, we've gone $5 trillion in debt. Last year, this year, next year, $4 trillion. It's cascading out of control. We don't budget. What the Congress does is they take last year's budget and they add to it. We are funding the priorities of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s without anybody checking to see whether or not those are our priorities in 2010. Without anyone checking to see whether or not we're spending our money efficiently and effectively. There's no budgeting in Washington. And it's unsustainable. Now, why does it matter to you? It matters to you because we're spending $200 billion a year. $200 billion a year paying the interest on the programs that we can't afford from the past. And by the end of the decade, it's $900 billion. And when we get to 2020 and we're spending $900 billion in interest, the government can't function. So we've got to do something about this spending. We've got to send people to Washington who have the courage of their convictions to do what is right, and when they're done, come home and live under the laws that they passed. Our founders never intended for people to be there 30 and 40 years. And we'll do that next Tuesday. We're going to win the House of Representatives. We may win the Senate. If we don't, we're going to come awfully close. And we need to do something that we usually don't do as Republicans. As Republicans, when we win an election, we usually go back to our families and to our businesses and stop paying attention to politics for a little while. Because politics and government is not our way of life. Our families and our businesses as Republicans are our way of life. But this fight is not going to be won on November 2nd alone. This fight is going to have to be fought 2 years from now and 4 years from now. We've got to change the complexion of our Congress. We've got to send more people to Washington who are going to do what's right and then come home and not spend 20, 30, 40 years in the Congress. Because if we don't, we're not going to make the real changes that we need. But I know that we can do it. I know that we can. And I'm going to close with this because I know we've got a debate to watch. We're going to watch our next governor, Rick Scott, win another debate against Alex Trump. We live in the greatest country in the world. The problems with America are not with Americans. They're with our government. And if we send the right people to Washington, we can fix them because we fix bigger problems. I just had dinner about a month ago with Doris Kearns Goodwin, the Pulitzer Prize-winning author who's written a book about Lincoln. She's writing a book about FDR. And she told me this story about how bad off we were in 1941 after Japan bombed us in Pearl Harbor and we entered World War II. We were 10 years behind the Nazis in the building of their war machine. While we were suffering through the Great Depression, they were building their military might. And at the beginning of the war, just to give you an example, it was taking America 300 days to build a troop transport. 300 days. By the end of the war, 5 years later, we were building a troop transport every single day. We put a man on the moon. Americans in their garages have founded companies like Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard. In their dorm rooms, companies like Google and Yahoo, which have changed the world. There is nothing as Americans that we can't do. We can solve these problems in Washington. We just need to send the right people there who have the courage of their convictions, who will do what's right, and then come home. I am so proud to be your senator. I am so proud to be the first United States senator in Broward County. As I look out the room and see the faces of my friends, I look at Barbara Collier and think about what you've meant to me. And I see Sharon Day next to me, and Cindy Guerra, and Ken Heiko, and Ed Kennedy, and others, Richard. And I'm so happy to be home. Mikey and I are back in Broward after 7 years. Can you believe it? 7 years. And now we come back with 4 children.
4 more Republicans.
4 more Republicans. Max is 7. Taylor's 5. Chase is 3. And 7 months ago, we had our baby girl. So we are blessed more than you could know, and we are grateful to be back. We just bought a house back here in Broward, and so happy to be back with you in a couple months. I'm going to go back to private life, and I'll probably be sitting in the chairs next to you. But God bless you for what you do. God bless you for all the support you've given me, and God bless America. Thank you very much.